All right, it's Tanya Summary Shiur time. It is week 42 Kanai and we're doing chapter 16, 17, 18, and a tiny bit of 19. A very interesting setup for this week. I have a little bit of a sore throat this week, so sorry if it sounds a little bit scratchy. I have a cup of tea. Hopefully we'll get through this. Without any further ado, let's begin. Chapter 16 of Yas Kodesh, the fourth part of Tanya, begins by saying, the Alter Rebbe says, guys, I know times are tough. I know that money is tight. And he says, notwithstanding the fact that money is tight, I'm still asking you to give tzedakah. And he says, firstly, that there's a point that needs to be made, which is that, in general, there's a rule in life, follows what they say on airplanes, that in the case of an emergency, first you put on your own mask, and then you proceed to help those sitting next to you. And there's reasons for that, but people take that attitude in life in general, that I can worry about helping other people when I myself am not only taken care of, but I'm actually comfortable. So the Alter Rebbe says, firstly, in halacha, the concept doesn't really exist. The concept exists that you're supposed to make sure that your family is taken care of, you're taken care of. But taking care of doesn't mean that you're living a life of luxury. Taking care of means that you're able to put food on the table, not the fanciest of food, but basic food. You're able to support your family. And after that, you're supposed to support your brothers that are in need. Now, this is besides the concept of meiser v'chulu. This is the concept of simply when people actually need food. This isn't people needing to make nice weddings for their children. This is people need food. So when it comes to something like that, we don't say that you need to have luxuries and that comes before other people. We say that as long as you're taken care of with the basics, you need to worry that others are also taken care of with the basics. Coming up to Yom Tov, it's a very relevant lesson. We say b'chal that Hashem wants that not only should we have luxury on Yom Tov, we should try to take care of others, that they should also be able to enjoy Yom Tov. Anyhow, so the Alter Rebbe says that's point number one. But then point number two is also that we're all taka in this together. And in general, everyone is supposed to try to support everyone. And so even if things are really, really tight inside you and your family, he's still encouraging that people should give to other yidden, to tzedakahs, v'chulu, that give tzedakah for people to be able to live, to have food. And he says even if things are actually tight for yourself in a very real way, but you should still give to others, and he gives a few reasons. Just list them off briefly. Firstly, there's a concept that we're all scared. We don't want to come to the level of the guy that has worse than us. So we should try to avoid that by giving tzedakah to him, which is a schola for not ending up where he is, or they, or she is, or they are. The second point is that we should appreciate that we need Hashem's mercy as much as the next person. Each one of us in our own way. We should appreciate that we're not needing the mercy that this person needs to literally be able to afford food, or else chas v'shalom starve, literally. So it's another thing to appreciate. He says that tzedakah, and I would imagine he's implying especially tzedakah like this, is very good for atonement. Tzedakah in general is very good for atonement. It was discussed at length in previous chapters. He says we all believe that tzedakah is really a loan to Hashem, so it's like you're helping Hashem in a sense by giving him a loan when you give tzedakah to someone else. So it's really, this concept is discussed in Nicholas, discussed in Gemara, that tzedakah is like a loan to Hashem. And then he also says that it's very important to include yourself in any mitzvah that the community is doing. And if people in the community are giving tzedakah, then every individual also needs to try to be part of the community endeavor to give tzedakah. The Alter Rebbe says, L'shemim yunaim, those that listen will certainly have good. And that is the first chapter, which is already like 4 minutes, so let's see how long the rest of them are. Went a little bit over on that, more than I thought it would be. Anyhow, on to chapter 17. So the Alter Rebbe says, it's known that when we arouse ourselves for kindness and for mercy, we cause that on high, above, there should be an arousal of mercy to come down into the world. So the Alter Rebbe says that this hashpah, this sustenance, vitality, whatever word would be used best to describe what comes from above, could be divided into two general categories of what's called peiros and keren, which is to say the dividends and the principal. I think that's the English terminology for it. So he says the dividends are things that we receive in this world, like children, vitality, health, and so on. Then he says that the keren, the principle, is something that we're going to essentially be discussing in the rest of the chapter. And to that end, he quotes the pasuk in Kapitel Kuf Yutes in chapter 119 of Tehillim, of Psalms, that says, which means that to every end, I've seen an end. Sounds already a little bit confusing. And then it says, but your mitzvah is very broad. Your commandment is very broad. So the Alter Rebbe says, we need to understand, what does it mean your commandment is very broad? If you want to say that it's saying there's no end to Hashem's commandments, then say his commandments, or your commandments are very broad. What do you mean your commandment in the singular? So the Alter Rebbe explains that the commandment singular is referring to the mitzvah of tzedakah. He says that through tzedakah alone are we able to cause, through this expression of kindness, which is analogous to Hashem's expression of kindness, we're able to cause in this world that ultimately when Mashiach comes, which he said before that the dividends are for this world, like the children and vitality and sustenance are for this world, the principle is for the world to come. So in the world to come, ultimately, the final stage of existence, of physical existence, is that we will be able to have an expression of godliness truly in the world in an appreciable way. And this is only accomplishable through tzedakah. The Alter Rebbe goes on to explain this concept, bringing proofs and elucidations from various Kabbalistic sources. There's a summary shiur, so I'm not going to get dafka into all of those. But that's essentially the gist of it, that through tzedakah we're able to cause that ultimately when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to have an actual appreciation of Hashem in a way that he can't really be appreciated in this world. And the Alter Rebbe explains the beginning of the pasuk, L'chol tichla is the case, that to every end I've seen an end. I translated it as end. But the Alter Rebbe takes the word tichla, and he says that it means, the word tichla is related to the word kilyon, which means like a yearning. It's related to the word for end. That is to say that it's like when you're at your wit's end with yearning. I don't know if that's a good way of putting it, but essentially that when you want something so much, it feels like you're striving upwards until you've reached your peak, until you've plateaued. So this, to every level of yearning that there exists in this world, or ECKs, there is some kind of end. Because in this world, all that we can appreciate are the dividends. We can't appreciate Hashem in every aspect. But ultimately, when Mashiach comes, then we're going to be able to appreciate how great, how broad the mitzvah of tzedakah is, the singular mitzvah of Hashem, the mitzvah that's an expression of godliness down here, that ultimately will be able to cause not just an expression of godliness, but with the coming of Mashiach, an appreciation of godliness in a tangible way. So that concludes chapter 17. Chapter 18, the Alter Rebbe starts by quoting a pasuk. It says, which means how beautiful and how sweet is love in pleasure. So the Alter Rebbe says, what is love in pleasure? Why not just say love if you have to make it into a question-answer kind of deal? But essentially, what does it mean? What's the language, the particular language of love in pleasure? So the Alter Rebbe says there's two kinds of love that a person has for Hashem. The first one is Ava B'Sar Nugim. It's the higher level of love that a person could have for Hashem. And this is essentially a kind of divine bliss. A person is inspired to appreciate Hashem in a way that's beyond their control. A person can't bring this onto themselves. It's something that Hashem will give to a person as a gift, that they have an appreciation for Hashem. And it's really sweet. It's beautiful. I don't know what words to use to describe it. I can't say that I've been there. But it's really just a pleasure of true love, like really, really true love. The Alter Rebbe says this love is not similar to yira. For every level of yira, we could be asked. It says that we are asked when we pass away. One of the questions we're asked is, did you strive to fear Hashem properly? B'chlal is a Gemara in Shabbos that discusses what a person is going to be asked when they pass away. They're going to be asked, for mostly, did you do business honestly? Then, did you learn Torah? Did you have set times for learning Torah? Did you have kids? Or I should say, did you try to have kids is really what they're going to ask. Did you look forward to Mashiach coming? Did you make Pilpulim in Chochmah? Etc. So these are things that they're going to ask a person. And it says, the most important thing over there is, did you really work to try to have Yiras Shamayim? But the common denominator of all of these things is these are things that are achievable, they're attainable to every person to their own level. As you go from highest to lowest, in a sense, it's things which are more attainable. Doing business honestly is quite attainable, and then having set times for learning Torah slightly less so. Working on having kids in a practical sense is also slightly less so, etc. But the point is, these are all things which are attainable. These are all things that a person could do, and at the top of them is Yiras Hashem, that we're supposed to try to work to have Yiras Hashem, Yiras Shamayim. Shtickle tangential for a summary shiur, I guess, but I don't feel like going back and deleting it. Anyhow, so that's all about Yira and how this higher level of love, Ava B'Sanugim, the love of pleasure, they're not similar, because love of pleasure is not something that a person could inspire. It's something that Hashem will give a person as a gift. But there is a kind of love, says Alter Rebbe, a lower kind of love, that a person is able to work towards. There's a natural love that people have for Hashem. And that's born through appreciating Hashem. When you appreciate Hashem and what He is, in all of the details, it just inspires a person to love them in a similar way to the way that people naturally have a kind of love for a parent. It could be that the parent could do something nasty that will get in the way of the love, etc. But just the natural inclination is that people try to love their family, their kin, etc. So there's an analogous kind of love that people have for Hashem that just needs to be brought out by appreciating Hashem. The more you appreciate Hashem, the more you appreciate this love. I'll try to give some examples for meditations to have about how Hashem is the source of all life, etc. They're all things that we've discussed at length in the first part of Tanya, so I'm not going to necessarily elaborate on them. There's just so much to be said about it. Hashem is quite great after all. But the Alter Rebbe says, this is the gist of it, to try to help the soul to express itself in appreciating Hashem, and in a sense to ask Hashem that He should help us, that we should be able to constantly appreciate this love for Him. And the Alter Rebbe at the end expresses it in a very interesting way. He says that we should ask Hashem that the godly soul should be the primary resident in our bodies, in a sense that we should be able to appreciate godliness on a constant basis. But he doesn't say to kick out the animal soul, but he says rather to only make use of it when it's necessary. As it says, which I think is very interesting, and really, not to go too off tangent, but I think it's really the point of this entire chapter, is to say that higher love is something which is good and well, and we should appreciate it if we have the opportunity and the wherewithal to. But then there's a lower level of love which we can appreciate with the godly soul primarily. But then there's also a certain kind of love that we can appreciate just with going through day-to-day life, that we eat food because it's necessary, because we need to live, and we should appreciate that we eat food because it's necessary and because we need to live. But it's not to say that eating food is a coarse and unrefined thing that we unfortunately need to do because we're flesh and blood and we can't relate to Hashem. No. The Alter Rebbe is saying that we should appreciate Hashem in everything in life. We should appreciate Hashem as He pertains to us. And we should say that Takat should be that we should have a clearness in this. And you can only get that clearness when the godly soul is the primary resident of our body. That is to say that we look at things primarily through the lens of the godly soul. That's not to say that we shouldn't also use the lens of the animal soul. And we should appreciate Hashem through every part of us, it's a very interesting concept. That's chapter 18 of part 4 of Tanya. And then just very briefly, because it is very brief, the beginning of chapter 19, Alter Rebbe starts by quoting a line, Eiter Kasalma, that Hashem enclothes in light like a garment, from Tehillim, which is Psalms chapter 104, if I'm not mistaken. And actually I don't think he ends up getting back to that pasuk, which is interesting why he quotes it at the beginning. Maybe it's related to the quote from the Arizal, which immediately follows it. It might be that the Arizal is expounding upon it. But anyhow, he quotes the Arizal as saying that Moshe Rabbeinu only understood, there's a lot of Kabbalistic terminology, so I'm just going to try to keep it a little bit brief. Moshe Rabbeinu only understood from the lower part of the world of Atzilus. The world of Atzilus is one of 4 worlds. It's the highest of the 4 worlds. It's the highest world that we can say that we have any direct relation to, in a way that we can appreciate. Essentially, this is Moshe Rabbeinu had an appreciation in the lower part of Atzilus. So, that's really the peak, the pinnacle of humanity, is that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to appreciate a perspective of the lower half of Atzilus. The lower third of Atzilus, there's a bunch of ways of slicing it. The lower part of Atzilus. So, the Alter Rebbe asks a very simple question, which is, we know that there's more than that above where Moshe Rabbeinu was able to appreciate. Firstly, there's the higher part of Atzilus, and secondly, we know a ton about what's above. The Arizal told us so much about what's above, so we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest prophet to ever live. So, what's the deal? How did the Arizal know more than Moshe Rabbeinu? So that's the question, and with that we leave off. There's going to be a good answer, Mr. Hashem, next week. This week, we already started with the answer, and we're going to be getting into some Kabbalistic concepts in Mirzas Hashem, and some more about Tzedakah. Mirzas Hashem, looking forward. And for the upcoming new year, that it should be a good Kibbutz Shiur.